student radio for Tampa Bay and the voice of Hillsborough Community College, streaming on the web 24/7.
The content of the following program does not necessarily express or imply the opinions and/or policies of Hillsborough Community College, talkradio.com, or WXYB-AM. The producer of this program created it solely for educational and/or entertainment purposes.
You're listening to The Edge. What constitutes mind control? What defines a cult? What effects do these phenomena have on individuals who get recruited into cults? Today we explore these and related questions with our guest, Steve Hassan. Steve Hassan is one of the foremost authorities on cults and mind control. He is a nationally certified counselor, a licensed mental health counselor, and the author of two of the most respected books on the subject of cults. His first book, Combating Cult Mind Control, the #1 guide to protection, rescue, and recovery from destructive cults, is published in 7 different languages. His second work, Releasing the Bonds, Empowering People to Think for Themselves, received critical acclaim from both peers and members of the clinical psychology communities. Steve Hassan is the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center Incorporated and holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from Cambridge College. Welcome to The Edge, Steve.
Thanks, Tom, for inviting me.
Your book, Releasing the Bonds, contains a great deal of material, so I would like to discuss the first half of your book in this program and the second half in a later program.
That's fine. Can I just make a comment before we begin and just say that I wrote the book. It was a 7-year project, and we edited it down from 700 pages to 400-odd pages, and it's still too big for a lot of folks. But the big point I wanted to make is that when I think now, having had 10 years, 11 years of feedback, that I was overly idealistic and ambitious in thinking people could read a book and rescue a loved one out of a cult. The vast majority of people still need advice and suggestions and outside help. So that's what I wanted to say before we talk about the book. Hopefully in the next edition, that will all be explained in detail.
All right. And we will, later in the program, discuss some of the resources that people can access if they have a loved one in a cult.
Mm-hmm.
What factors comprise mind control?
Well, I guess I want to start by saying that in my mind, there's a continuum with an arrow, let's say, going to the left towards ethical influence and the arrow going to the right with destructive influence. And so there really are specific behaviors that comprise destructive mind control, but an organizing principle, a way of using components to look at this evaluation process is what I refer to as the BITE model of mind control. In other words, the B stands for controlling behavior, the I stands for controlling information, the T stands for controlling thoughts, and the E stands for controlling emotions. And on the right side, the destructive end of mind control, we're talking about extremes where, for example, with information control, unethical organizations are not telling people up front who they are, what they believe, and what's going to happen to them when they get in. So there's no informed consent. Whereas on the left side of the continuum, there is full disclosure before anyone is asked to come to a meeting or give money or join. So, for example, under behavior control in the extreme groups control people's sleep, they control people's diet, they control people's clothing, they control where they live and who they associate with. They use behavior modification techniques of rewards and punishments to reinforce their involvement. The bottom line with destructive behavior control is the need for dependency and obedience. the opposite of the left side of the continuum, which is a respect for someone's free will and the ability for an adult to determine what they do with their life. With the information control, we're looking at everything, not just from a lack of informed consent, but using information to manipulate and control people, information often given in confidence, using people to spy on you, using information gained from confessions to manipulate and control and even coerce people, where there's insider doctrines and outsider doctrines. With Scientology in particular, this is an egregious component because people are told that you can't know the OT levels until you're ready, otherwise you will die of pneumonia or whatever. And so in an ethical organization, there's full disclosure. You know what the beliefs are before you're asked to join, and you know that. So going on in information control, there's not this idea of different levels of knowledge, this secret knowledge in an ethical group. There is that disclosure. And then with thought control, the unethical mind control dimension is that members are not allowed to think negative thoughts and are taught techniques to shut down any critical thinking. In Scientology and the Moonies, it may be called the reactive mind. It might be called your fallen mind, is what we called it in the Moonies. But you're taught to get rid of any dissonant noise or thoughts that question the leader, the doctrine, or the group. There's a loaded language, which is part of the thought control process. In the Moonies, we never went that far, where there's an entire dictionary of terms that people have to use to indoctrinate themselves to think within. But again, with thought control, basically you're not allowed to think outside of the closed system of the organization's worldview. And then with emotional control, you're made to feel like you're chosen, like you're special, like you're part of the elite, but mostly it's about manipulation through guilt and fear, with an emphasis on fear. And the ultimate mind control technique, in my opinion, is phobia indoctrination, what I refer to as phobia indoctrination. And in Releasing the Bonds, I know we're going to get into the second part of the book in the next half an hour, but the implantation of irrational fears to make people believe that their life will fall apart if they leave the group or if they question the leader and such is an egregious component of mind control. All in all, BITE, and it's all in service of creating a new identity that is dependent and obedient on the group. So I refer to mind control, destructive mind control, as a dissociative disorder, where your cult identity suppresses your real identity, your authentic self. The good news is the human spirit wants to be free, in my opinion. It doesn't like to be lied to. We don't like to be abused and manipulated. And people do leave, even if they're born into destructive mind control cults. If given the right set of circumstances, they will choose to leave. So that's a brief summary, Tom.
Can you define cult for our listeners?
Well, quick story. Well, first I'll say that there are cults, and then there are destructive cults. And so all of my work is focused around destructive cults. But a quick funny story to share. I got a phone call from a writer. He said, I'm writing a book. My editor says, I need to interview you. I said, okay, what's the book about? He said, computers. I said, that's odd. I said, why do you need to talk to a cult expert? He said, because the book's title is The Cult of Mac. And I laughed and I said, well, I'll give you an interview, but I have to first disclose that I've only used Apple since 1982 and I have 5 Macs right now.
So you're a Mac cultist.
I am a Mac cultist, and I'm in the book called The Cult of Mac as a devotee.
All right.
Which I think is pretty cute.
Okay. Go ahead.
Right. So, I mean, the bottom line for me is destructive cult is an authoritarian, pyramid-structured relationship or group where there's deceptive recruitment, and the use of BITE, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, to create a new identity that's dependent and obedient on the leader or on the group structure. So that's my definition. It's a behavioral definition. It's not about the weird, wacky beliefs. It's really about the process of how people are recruited, what happens when they're in the group, and how free they are to leave, and what kinds of problems they have when they leave psychologically and emotionally.
Can you give us some insight into what occurs psychologically and sociologically to a person who gets recruited into a cult? Is that too broad a question?
Well, it is. I guess I want to say that I've seen in my 35-plus year career many micro cults of one person dominating and controlling a person to groups that have millions of people in it. I've dealt with religious cults, political cults, therapy cults, business cults. And so there really is a wide variation, even within a particular organization, of somebody's specific experience. And having done that qualifier, I would say that basically what happens in the beginning is a systematic, deceptive, manipulative seduction, often by an attractive member, either of the same sex if you're gay, or of the opposite sex if you're heterosexual. You could be recruited by your therapist or your teacher or your doctor or your lawyer, but it's a personal influence process in which in the beginning you're perceiving the recruiter as your friend or as your lover or as your teacher. And so your guard is not as high up as just a stranger who's approaching you cold. And in the beginning, you may learn some interesting things. They may love bomb you and make you feel really special. They certainly are going to be eliciting a lot of personal information about your background so that they can construct an approach to get you all the way into the group and get your money and get you to drop out of school if that's the MO of that particular cult, and get you to work long hours for little or no pay and spend a lot of time recruiting new people and bringing in money. Once you go past the honeymoon phase, it's a treadmill of sorts where, like, the donkey is given a carrot that's hanging just outside of its reach. Members think that if they keep working and doing the courses or doing the program or doing the workshops, they're going to have these great breakthroughs and develop all kinds of powers and abilities, and their IQs are going to go up. But in fact, it's a closed system to make the person feel like it's their fault that they're not growing and learning and achieving all these things. And so they have to go back and redo the courses or do more auditing, or if they've gotten rid of all their trauma in their life, then they have to go into their past lives to get rid of the trauma. And of course, it's a never-ending experience because the group doesn't want you to ever graduate. They want you to be dependent and obedient. So ultimately what winds up happening when you get into one of these groups is your family and friends go, "Steve, what are you doing? You always used to be so independent and thinking for yourself, and now you're in a cult and you're brainwashed." And of course, if family members and friends say that, you've already been indoctrinated to believe that Satan is in the world, in my particular cult, and they're going to work through your family and the ones you love the most. So you basically have less and less contact with them unless they start to